This is the Eco small basket, which comes with one tray / crate bottom, 2 long sides, 2 short sides, and our assembly hardware. For assembly hardware, we have short M5 bolts. We have longer M5 bolts, which are used to attach the finished basket, and M5 nuts and washers. When it comes time to put the assembled basket on the bike, we've got some spacers that are necessary. And if you happen to have cargo rack from your existing bike, you'll be using these clamps to attach it to that rack. Step 1 is attaching the short side to the crate bottom. For this step and the rest of them, we're gonna use an 8mm socket wrench or an 8mm open wrench and a 3mm hex key. To attach the short side, we're gonna use our short screw with a washer on it. Insert it through the hole in the crate bottom, add another washer, and just start the nut finger tight. We're gonna do that 3 more times and do the same thing on the other side. Once we've got one side on, we're gonna leave it loose and do the other side. Okay, moving on to our second short side. Same as the first, using a washer under each bolt and under each nut. We're just gonna get all the hardware started. That's step 1 complete. We're gonna leave them loose because that'll help make sure everything aligns on step 2. We've got our short sides on from step 1. So step 2 is putting our long sides on, which will connect to the short sides and to the tray bottom. To do that, I've got all of my short M5 bolts, my washers, and my nuts. So we're just gonna pin this together, finger tight. Once we have everything connected, we'll go through and tighten all the hardware from step 2 and step 1 by hand. Got our bolt from the outside and a washer and a nut on the inside. Okay, that's one long side started with all 7 bolts. So now we'll continue and do the same thing on the last remaining side. Okay, we've got all of our hardware started from step 1 and step 2. So now we're gonna go through and tighten it all by hand. For that, we're gonna be using an 8mm socket and 3mm hex key. In the corners, the nuts are a little close together. Probably gonna find that a wrench works a little better. You might be tempted to use power tools, but that's not recommended. Because these are stainless, stainless can gall, which is like seize up. All right, we've got all of our hardware snugged by hand. Just double check that you didn't forget any. You don't have to go too tight because these are nylon locking nuts, so they're never gonna come loose. So now we've got our completed and assembled small basket. You have 2 options for orientation, a wide orientation or a longer orientation. And in either case, still reference the arrow to make sure you're placing it correctly on the rack so our holes are in the correct position. Okay, we're ready to put the small basket on your bike. If your rack looks like this, the first step is getting our loop clamps in place. To do that, we're gonna slip them in place and make sure that the holes are oriented outside the 2 center bars. You'll need 2 on each. One is going to go in front of this zip tie holder and one's gonna go behind it. And do the same thing for the other side. Once those are setting in place, we're gonna move the basket on top. We can adjust their position and we'll get it attached. Okay, I've got my basket. Now it's time to decide the orientation. Do I want it to be wide or do I want it to be long? For this installation, we're gonna orient the basket in the wide direction. So I'm looking for the arrow that points towards the bike. I'm gonna set that in place, and I've got 20 millimeter long M5 screws, and I'm gonna start by placing those through the slotted holes. The slotted holes are used when you're attaching to the loop clamps on this rack. For the Eco rack, we're gonna use the holes. So I'm gonna start by putting a bolt through the slot and through the first loop clamp. Now this is kind of the tricky part. We're gonna use one of the 1/4" spacers that came, the rubber mount on the loop clamp. Once we've got one of our bolts through, we're gonna secure it finger tight with a washer and one nut. All right, we've got the first one started, so the basket's not gonna fall off. Now we'll just repeat for the 3 other clamps. This clamp actually needs to go behind the rear zip tie. All right, we've got our second clamp aligned. We're gonna make sure we put a spacer between the basket and the clamp. Use our 20 millimeter long M5 and a washer and a nut on the bottom. All right, 2 down. Now repeat on the other side. We want to leave these finger tight to allow us to get our spacers underneath on the opposite side. We've got all 4 of our clamps in place with our spacers and our hardware started. The next step is to align it, make sure it's centered on the bike, make sure everything looks good, and then you can go ahead and tighten the hardware down. Once we've got our hardware started, we can go ahead and tighten it, making sure that the rack is centered and in the position that you want it to be in. Okay.